All right, we might get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today in this lovely, lovely space for this particular symposium. My name is Jasmine Chen. I am a lecturer here at Macquarie University. I'm also a member with the Lifespan Health and Wellbeing Research Centre. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to join us today, and also welcome to those who are joining us online on Zoom this morning. So before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Wallumattagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the dream time. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. So just two key things, housekeeping things before we begin with this symposium. So firstly, this event will be recorded. And for our online participants, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions throughout the presentation. Please make sure you use the Q&A function, not the chat function, to pop your questions through. I will be moderating the questions throughout the symposium. All right, let's get started. So our symposium today is focusing on social connections in older adulthood. And specifically, this symposium is all about understanding barriers and facilitators. So we've got two fantastic presenters with us today to talk about this subject. So first up, I'd like to invite Dr. Suraj Samtani, beg your pardon, to join us. And so Suraj is going to talk about social connections for healthy brain aging, evidence from a longitudinal studies. So just a few words about Suraj. Suraj is a postdoctoral fellow at Centre for Healthy Brain Aging at UNSW Sydney, and he's also a clinical psychologist. His research explores the power of social connections to promote cognitive, emotional, and physical healthy aging. He was awarded a Dementia Australia Research Foundation Fellowship to conduct a randomized controlled trial for novel social cognitive skills intervention for older adults with cognitive impairment. So I'm really, really excited to have Suraj here to speak with us about some of his research findings. After that, I'm going to hold off introducing our second guest speaker, Dr. Diana Matovic. I'll just hold off on the introduction, but I'm very excited to have Diana here with us as well. So I would also mention that after our two presenters' presentations, we'll have a brief Q&A before we finish up, just to make sure that we have an opportunity to have a quick discussions around in terms of the research that are currently happening in this space, but also for us to think about where to go in this particular research stream. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Samtani to join us here.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me loud and clear? Great. Thanks for bearing with us with the technical issues, but we're ready to go. So thank you, Jessamine, for inviting me to speak here today. And thank you to all of you for coming here today. And today I'm going to be talking about the power of social connections for healthy brain aging. And now the keyboard doesn't. So I'd also like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. on which we meet today, the Walumatical clan of the Darug Nation, and I pay respects to elders past, present, and I extend that respect to all First Nations people present here today and joining us online. Thank you so much. So, a little bit about me. My name is Suraj. It rhymes with fudge. You'll soon see that all my jokes are food related. My name means the sun in Hindi. I did a master's and PhD in clinical psychology at the University of New South Wales, then went on to work as a clinical psychologist for several years before coming back to be a nerd at university and study dementia. So that's what I do now at the Center for Healthy Brain Aging. And when I'm not a nerd, I also teach music. So I teach children how to play piano and sing. I work at the Center for Healthy Brain Aging, as I mentioned, and I'm really proud to work there. It is a fantastic place with collaborations with people all around the world and acclaimed as a leading center for research in dementia. We are a self funded institute within the university. And as you can see here from our slide, we have several studies which have been running for a long time, for 10 to 15 years. And that has been a rich source of data for us to understand what are the risk factors and protective factors for healthy aging. One thing that makes us stand out is our multidisciplinary focus. So we look at healthy brain aging from multiple angles. So this includes things like brain imaging, biomarkers, neuropsychiatry, and risk factors, as well as clinical care. I'd like to thank our team involved in this project, especially our two co-directors, Professor Henry Brodati and Professor Parminder Sachdev. So today I'll be talking about social isolation and loneliness and why that's such a problem in our society. And we tried to answer the question of exactly what kind of social interactions do we need to stay healthy? And then just how much do we need? So I promise you, you will walk away with those two answers from this talk today. And we'll also talk about why social interactions help us to age well and how we can promote this in the community. So let's think about social connections. These are really important for us as human beings. We need social connection just like plants need sunlight. Without social connections, we wither. Let's start off with the story. This is someone that I saw in the clinic. I've changed her name and photo for confidentiality reasons, but we'll call her Joanna. Joanna came to me just after she'd retired. She'd been married for many years. She just stopped interacting with people because all her friends were work colleagues. And she realized she was really isolated after retirement. She started to feel a loss of interest in activities and she became quite depressed and she was starting to forget things. So when she came to me, she was worried about depression as well as possibly getting dementia since she already had a family history. So I want you to remember her story because we'll come back to it at the end. Joanna's not the only one in this situation. Data from the last 20 plus years shows us that social interactions have been steadily declining. People tend to focus more and more on online interactions and less on face to face interactions. And we assume that older adults will actually be the most loneliest because we hold stereotypes. But it's actually the opposite. Older adults are less lonely. And that's because they have a superpower. And that's to focus on positive connections and positive interactions. And that's why we see this smile, the happiness curve of life across thousands of people from all around the world. Over and over again, we see that people are happy in their childhood and then their happiness goes down. Study after study shows us that we are the unhappiest when we have teenage children. And then we get happier as time goes on, and hopefully they move out. Then we get our happiest years in our 70s and 80s and beyond. So when 20-year-olds come to me and say, these should be the best years of my life, I say to them, hang on, just wait another 50 years. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we've all been told to socially distance. And I see three groups of people coming to me in the clinic. One group that was always extroverted, stayed engaged. The second group who withdrew, and then as the world opened back up, they went on to interact again. Then I have a third group who say, well, I really stopped interacting and now I've lost confidence. I don't remember people's names, faces. I don't remember what's going on in their lives. How am I supposed to talk to them again? And so COVID's really made loneliness worse. We see rates of loneliness have gone up from 6 to 21%, as you would expect. And this is a problem because loneliness and depression and lack of social support are risk factors for dementia. So, just to briefly talk about dementia, it is an umbrella term that describes several conditions which affect our memory and thinking and impact our daily life. And Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, it is the most common type. We also have Lewy body dementia, which causes hallucinations, vascular dementia, which happens after a stroke, and frontotemporal dementia, which causes changes in personality. There's over 100 different types of dementia, and so I'm not going to list them all. What is important to know is that almost 500,000 people in Australia live with dementia, and it's the leading cause of death for women and second leading cause of death overall, and soon to be the leading cause of death for everyone. You see that for every person living with dementia, there's many people involved in their care. And so we have over 1.5 million people involved in the care of someone living with dementia. So let's talk about social connections and why they're important for our health. Earlier this year in July, the Lancet Commission released a report identifying the risk factors which we can modify. What can you change? Because half is genetic, but this other half we have some control over. And you'll see that social isolation is another one of these risk factors. In fact, if you eliminated social isolation, you would prevent 5% of cases around the world. That's a lot of people, given how many people live with dementia. It's equivalent to the population of New Zealand currently. So what we know is that loneliness is really bad for us, as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we know this from the Harvard study of adult development, the longest running study of happiness in the world. It's been going for 80 years. Another finding from the Harvard study is that being socially connected delays health conditions like diabetes, heart disease to 10 to 15 years later. Imagine having that much extra time of being healthy. So we wanted to know, what are the ingredients to healthy aging from social health perspective? So social health involves how we connect to others, but also how we feel when we're with other people. So this involves whether we live with others, do community activities, have someone to talk to when we feel stressed. How satisfied are we with these relationships? Do we see friends and family? If so, how often? Are we in a relationship? How often do we feel lonely? So we looked at all of these factors. And to take a truly global perspective, we looked at 13 longitudinal studies which had followed people for up to 14 years from all around the world, nearly 40,000 people. And we wanted to answer the question, after accounting for all the other known risk factors for dementia, do social connections still matter? So that's why we accounted for all of these, and we found that yes, social connections reduce your risk of dementia by half. By half even after accounting for all the other risk factors. That's amazing. Just think of what we can do in this space. What was important were these ones highlighted in navy. You can see that interacting with friends and family was important, but just how often? Well, we can answer that question. Once a month was enough. But obviously, the more, the better. Having someone to talk to when we feel stressed was really important, as you'll see. And not feeling lonely very often mattered, as you would have guessed. We also wanted to know what helps us to live longer lives. And what we found was it was living with others, doing community activities, and again, this secret ingredient of having a confidant to talk to, which mattered. But as a psychologist, I don't just want to live longer, I want to be happy. So I thought, well, what about mental health? What helps us to lead happier lives? And again, it was having emotional support, not practical support with groceries and not informational support like which doctor should I see. So a lot of people ask me, are virtual connections good enough? I video call family and friends. Is that enough? The answer is yes, but it's about half as effective as face to face. So why do social connections make us happy? Well, we think this is because of two things, bridging and bonding. Social connections provide a bridge to doing activities that keep us healthy, like social and cognitive activities like playing board games or going to watch movies or whatever it is that we enjoy. And bonding is what helps us to lower our stress. Having a close connection with someone reduces our level of chronic stress. And we know how bad chronic stress is for the brain. It literally makes the memory center of the brain, the hippocampus, shrink over time. So, what happened to Joanna? Well, I asked Joanna, what did you enjoy doing before? And she said, well, I haven't really spoken to my best friend in a while. We used to go on road trips and I used to like photography. And I said, okay, let's do something about that. So she went away. She contacted her best friend. They started planning road trips. She found her digital SLR in her linen closet and she joined a local photography group, went around taking photos of gardens and cottages. And she decided to volunteer to raise money for MS because her sister had MS. And her mood improved and her memory improved. Sometimes we have barriers to social connection, like stigma. Sometimes if we lose our confidence, we feel that other people won't talk to us or other people withdraw from us. There's practical issues like transport, mobility, caring responsibilities. But the biggest one I see is lack of confidence. So here are some practical strategies. Think about what you enjoy doing, just like Joanna. Find a practical option. What's actually doable? Start small. Maybe just text or call someone you haven't spoken to in a while and reward yourself. Food is important. So go for a walk and reward yourself with some chocolate or coffee. If you're not sure where to find resources or groups, the New South Wales government now has an NGO called Live Up that you can contact and they can connect you to your local groups. So I'll just give you a minute to take a picture or write this down. So what if you already have mild cognitive impairment or you're living with dementia? Well, it's not over. You can still lead a full, happy life. And it's important that you do that. Stay mentally, socially, physically active. We found in our study, which we published a few years ago, that for people, even in the mid and late stages of dementia, when they didn't have language, they could still participate in music and dance groups. Even just clapping or playing a beat really helps people to become alive. You just see people's faces transform, a big smile, they're interacting, it changes their whole day. So, to help people be more socially active, we are running a new study called Maintaining Social Engagement. It's an online social group study where you chat to other people from all around Australia. It's open to people all over the country who are aged over 55. So I'll let you take a picture if you like, or use the QR code if you would like to be a part of this study, or if you'd like to adopt someone in. Now is your time. So our take-home messages are: social interactions are key to living a healthy and happy life. Remember to meet your friends or family at least once a month and talk to someone you trust, friend, family member, or a health professional. It's important to remember that we're all in it together. We're supporting each other. So if there's someone you haven't spoken to in a while, please text or call them today. And remember that small steps lead to confidence, and it's never too late to start. So if you would like to have bragging rights with your friends and know all the latest brain research, you can sign up to our newsletter. So I'll give you a second to do that if you like. We've also got flyers here for people who are here in person. And those are our details if you'd like to know more about what we do. So thank you everyone for coming here and joining us online, for listening, and for your time. Thank you so much.
So we have time for one question before we move on to the next presentation. Would anyone like to ask any question? Yes.
Thank you. Interaction, if I'm understanding correctly. But then you also show us that you're running kind of like an online Zoom social sessions. So I'm just wondering, when we are being more and more adapted to, or like being more comfortable with these kind of social environment, online, virtual, would it become more effective, do you think, compared to the face-to-face? Obviously, we wouldn't be able to say physically hurt someone, or like having that kind of physical interaction, but it does overcome a lot of like geographical or like physical condition constraint, that kind of thing. So yeah.
That's a really good question. The question is, does online interaction become more and more powerful as we get used to it over time? And, I don't know the full answer to that. Maybe in the future they'll be close to where physical interactions are, but I suspect that being in the physical presence of someone you care about is really powerful. Having a hug from someone releases a lot more oxytocin than talking to them online. And oxytocin is a bonding chemical, for example, which gets released when a parent holds a child, for example. So I think while online interactions are really good and we think they're really important, otherwise we wouldn't do this study at all, I see them as a gateway. So for example, one of our participants had not talked to anyone for many years, actually since the pandemic. And after doing the online study, decided to join a local yoga group and now has made friends with everyone there. So it's really important that people start taking a step, because every step leads to a little bit more confidence.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Suraj. That was a beautiful presentation. Alrighty, next up, we have Dr. Diana Matovic, who is going to tell us all about barriers and enablers of social participation in older adults with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia, and their older adult carers and supporters. And she's also going to talk about the design and early intervention of a social participation intervention in these populations. I should also mention that Dr. Matovic is a postdoctoral researcher and a member of the Macquarie University Lifespan Health and Wellbeing Research Centre. And Diana manages the Aging Well tool, designed to screen for risk factors for dementia and poor wellbeing, for example, depression and social isolation in older adults in primary care settings, and provide evidence-based recommendations for risk reduction. Diana also works on related projects such as looking at social participation, mental health, and well-being in older adults with healthy cognitions and older adults with mild cognitive impairments and early dementia. And they're older adult carers and supporters, and the mechanisms underlying positive mood in older adults. There's quite a spectrum of the work that Diana is doing in this space. And I will also mention that she's a recipient of the Contribution Award from the International Society of Behavioural Medicine 2018. Is that correct? Okay, all right. That was in my notes, so I'm very sorry. My apologies. All right, well, without further ado, welcome, Diana.
Make sure I time myself. All right, so thank you for that introduction, Jessamine, and thank you everyone for being here today to listen to our talks. I'll be talking about social connections in people with mild cognitive impairment and dementia and their carers and supporters. So first, I'm going to start by talking about the benefits of social participation. Social participation refers to activities that people engage in with others for personal enjoyment. In older adults with healthy cognition, such as in carers, social isolation is the largest risk factor for dementia, which Suraj mentioned. So as you can see in that graph, I'm not going to try with the pointer, down in later life, social isolation accounts for 5% of dementias. And so reducing social isolation could result in a 5% decrease in the prevalence of dementias worldwide. Some studies have found that feeling socially connected to a variety of different social groups is particularly important for maintaining cognitive function. And it's engagement with social groups that seems to be particularly important compared to one-on-one interactions. In people with mild cognitive impairment, targeting social participation may reduce their risk for developing dementia. So individuals with mild cognitive impairment are 3.3 times more likely to develop dementia compared to age-matched controls over 2 to 5 years. However, some people will go back to being cognitively normal, so they're not necessarily going to develop dementia, and some people remain having mild cognitive impairment. One study found that there was a lower risk of progression from mild to severe cognitive impairment over 3 years, associated with both greater frequency and variety of social activities. Another study found that engaging in community meetings and cultural classes was associated with a higher likelihood of reverting from MCI to cognitively normal over 4 years. And so despite the potential for social activity to reduce mild cognitive impairment, people with MCI typically report poor social support, social isolation, and loneliness, as Suraj found in his paper. And so therefore, we need methods to increase social engagement in this population. So similarly, in people with mild to moderate dementia, social participation has the potential to slow their cognitive decline. So for instance, a knitting group was found to increase the use of cognitive processes such as memory and problem solving, as well as the use of communication skills. Another study found that greater support from the social environment reduced the risk of mortality in people with dementia, with the role of emotional support being particularly important, as Suraj has highlighted. However, 50% of people living with dementia report being lonely, and 70% have stopped doing their usual social activities due to psychological barriers such as concerns about reactions from other people, difficulties maintaining conversations, lack of confidence, and shrinking social networks, as well as logistical barriers such as having to stop driving. And so we also need strategies to mitigate these challenges in maintaining social participation in this group. So what do we have in terms of social participation interventions? So in people with mild cognitive impairment and dementia, a systematic review found only 2 randomized controlled trials. The The first trial showed a benefit of early stage memory loss social support groups for depression and quality of life in people with dementia. And the second trial showed that post-treatment self-esteem was higher in the group receiving a multi-component intervention of social support compared to those not receiving the intervention. So as you can see, there's limited evidence in this group. And when we are doing social participation interventions, it is important to measure social participation and social support outcomes. So looking at carers, a systematic review of 39 studies identified 4 types of social support, social intervention categories. So you've got the befriending and social support, family support and social network interventions, social groups, and remote interventions using the internet or telephone. Most studies measured the effect of social participation on wellbeing variables, which is important. However, few examined social support outcomes. Multi-component social support interventions were the most effective. And evidence also suggests a caregiver benefit from remote interventions. So perhaps because they're more convenient and caregiving places demands on carers' time. So there's a clear need for more research to understand how to increase and maintain frequent and high quality social interactions in people with cognitive impairment and their supporters. But first, we need to understand the unique barriers and enablers of social participation in these populations in order to maximize the effectiveness of these interventions. So I did a study on barriers and facilitators of social participation in these groups. So it involved a survey and focus group studies with 18 older adults with MCI or early stage dementia and 40 older adult carers and supporters aged about 72. So 26% of my carers experienced social isolation above clinical cutoffs, and 55% of people with dementia and MCI were socially isolated. There were high rates of loneliness, relatively low rates of depressive symptomology, high rates of anxiety symptomology. About a third or more of the sample experienced moderate or major difficulties with staying socially connected, and about a third or more of the sample were moderately or very upset by this. So I came up with some multiple choice barriers that people could indicate were problems for them. So this is the people with mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And this was co-designed with dementia advocates. So I have a person who's a carer for a person with dementia who provided feedback on this, as well as a person with dementia that consults on the project and all of these projects that you're going to hear about today. And so I did that in order to try to make sure that I captured people's experiences. For people with dementia, the major barriers were transport, motivation, lack of confidence, lack of choice in social groups, embarrassment about having a diagnosis, being worried that they're going to say something silly, being left out of conversations, and the top 2 were not being able to keep up in conversation and forgetting people's names. So these themes are collated across several questions where I asked about people's quantitative responses. And so the major themes that came up for people with dementia and mild cognitive impairment were practical issues, including transport, non-dementia related health issues, so things like hearing loss, as well as declining physical health and affordability. So I'm no longer able to drive. So this has made it more difficult to be able to independently access social activities. Impaired cognitive processing was also reflected in the themes. So not being able to keep up in conversations and memory issues in social interactions. So with certain people or social activities, I've become less engaged as I feel I'm not always able to keep up with conversations. It can be difficult to find social groups with whom I can engage. Poor social support was also a theme, including people not understanding or providing suboptimal support, and even negative responses such as ostracism and being treated badly. Sometimes my problem was made too much of, sometimes it was discounted. Ostracized by family, blamed. And themes also reflected people with cognitive impairments' negative feelings, including embarrassment, guilt, low confidence and or motivation, and a loss of identity. I felt embarrassed and lacked confidence. I felt a loss of identity. So looking at the carers in my sample didn't experience or didn't indicate a lot of barriers in the quantitative data. And so most of them did not experience any difficulties, or they put an other response, such as difficulties with finding respite care. But the major barriers were motivation and other people feeling uncomfortable around them. However, the themes from the open-ended questions did reveal some barriers. So one of the barriers was practical constraints, including transport, geography or location, carers' health issues, finances, difficulty organising respite care as practical constraints. So my husband was the main driver. I'm less confident, especially with night driving. I no longer attend several social groups that we used to attend together. I worry about the cost for outings. Carers also, another theme was missing social and family events and wanting more frequent social contact, as well as finding the social adjustment hard. I miss the activities we enjoyed together and not seeing our friends and relatives so much. Another theme was the behavioural and psychological symptoms of dementia. So this is where a person with dementia perhaps acts in an agitated or frustrated way, or in a way that's not characteristic with their usual behaviour. So BPSD, concern, and the need for supervision, including being worried about the person with dementia's behaviour when the carer is not there, the person with dementia exhibiting rude, controlling, or embarrassing behaviour, the person with dementia needing supervision or not wanting to be social. Mum wanted constant attention. If we were in a social situation and no one was talking to her, even for a minute, she would get quite nasty and demand to go home. Always put me on edge. Feel embarrassed about my wife's sometimes strange behaviour. And finally, another theme was less time or energy to be social and or work. So time spent attending to Dad reduced the time I might have otherwise spent on social activities. Having the emotional energy to want or to be able to socialise. So looking at the facilitators in people with dementia and mild cognitive impairment, their facilitators were educating friends about changes in their circumstances and helping them learn what they could do to assist, understanding friends and dedicated friends, reducing their social network to people who could support them, continuing to engage in previously enjoyed groups, and their carer or supporter encouraging them to stay socially active. So themes reflected this, so being proactive, including keeping in touch with people, hosting at home, or volunteering, and using psychological skills. So connected to many on Facebook, I'm a dementia advocate, involved in research projects, so that keeps me socially engaged. Cognitive behavioural therapy and self-talk is helpful. Another theme was having informal and neighbourhood support. That was a facilitator for people. So I live in a close-knit community like a little village. So have brief conversations with neighbours and acquaintances. Even my local GP, pharmacist and dentist and shop assistants are friends. And some indicated that difficulties were not yet overcome. So for carers, they had a lot more facilitators, and perhaps because they had so many facilitators, they didn't indicate as many barriers. As with people with dementia, educating friends was a facilitator, as were understanding and dedicated friends, continuing to engage in previously enjoyed groups. And for carers, organisations such as Dementia Australia providing resources. Themes for carers indicated that individual friendships, including contacting or reconnecting with family or friends, was important. Have started getting back into the swing of it, and it really makes a big difference for me, just meeting others to communicate, to socialize, as well as getting information and resources from organisations and dementia support groups. I helped run a support group for carers for many years, where I heard and listened and hopefully supported people. I find that I'm now on the other side, and I need the support, the information, and the caring now. It's just so beautiful, and I'm very grateful for it. Another facilitator was joining and continuing to socialise through various clubs and groups and local council programs, and work even being a social way to socialise. So the new church has been very supportive. Joined a fitness club, walking group, Probus, Meetup, Chirpy Plus and Stitch. I had to look those up. Sydney Blues Society, and a theatre group arranged by me. And then other carers talked about how placing the person with dementia into respite gave them more time and capacity for social activities. So to conclude, Jessamine, I have 15 minutes, not two left. So to conclude, people with mild cognitive impairment, people with mild cognitive impairment and early stage dementia and carer supported populations experience practical and psychological barriers to social participation. Interventions should target these barriers and increase facilitators, including educating friends and family and providing psychological skills for embarrassment and joining new groups. Therefore, we're currently pilot testing a cognitive behavioural therapy intervention, which is the gold standard for psychological therapy, to address these unique barriers and facilitators to increase social participation. This has been developed with clinical psychologists and co-designed with people with dementia and MCI and carers to ensure that it addresses the unique barriers and facilitators relevant to these groups. So for instance, with carers, they reported that embarrassment was a barrier for them. And so they can ignore the behaviour if it's not bothering anyone. So this is just an excerpt from the booklets. The carer booklet's about 10 to 12 pages, and the person with dementia booklet's about 5 or 6 pages. So that they can also use distraction, and there's some practical tips on how to do that. They could apologise if needed, if they've offended someone. And they can also look out for common triggers. So this might be a change in the person's energy levels or emotional state, or environmental factors such as noisy environments. For people with dementia and mild cognitive impairment, one of their biggest barriers was being able to keep up in conversations and being left out. So some things that they can do is, if they're finding it hard to follow fast or complicated conversations, they could say, I didn't quite catch that. Could you please slow down, speak a little clearer, re-explain that part? Or they could ask a trusted friend or family member to explain the conversation afterwards. So if they are finding it hard to think of the right word, they could make finding the word into a game. So you can usually remember details about a word and give clues. So for example, if you're trying to remember the word rose, you can think to yourself, it's a flower with thorns, it smells nice, it's the flower of Valentine's Day, and there are several other strategies. So I had to do a preliminary analysis because I'm running a grant that's due on Monday, and I was very pleased to find. So we have 8 dyads and 7 with some data in terms of their check-in calls. So of those 7 dyads, so 14 people total, 7 people with cognitive impairment and 7 carers, 93% of participants reported that the resource was helpful for improving or increasing their social interactions. One carer stated, this intervention is helping someone whose social skills have been dulled as a carer get the confidence to use them again. Another person with dementia said, I definitely need the strategies. The booklet headings are clear, the content's easy to read, and the examples are realistic. Participants have also reported improvements in cognition. So for example, one carer stated, the person with mild cognitive impairment seems to be cognitively better since starting the strategies. She improved so much, so I'm not watching over her. I'm more relaxed and I'm not panicking about the future. And the person with mild cognitive impairment confirmed. By challenging myself to be more socially active, I've gotten more mentally active and alert. We have 2 spots left. 2 more dyads can join. So if you think that this might be helpful for you, please get in touch. Thank you.